Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about Fallout Season 1 Episode 6. It's called The Trap. So spoilers for the episode. This one kind of pivots us back to having a bit of all the main characters again. A lot of flashbacks for the ghoul and life before the bombs dropped. Obviously we've had some of those in the past. We've had him doing the movie scene and the reveal that he was in the ad campaigns. This one was even a bit more heavier than that, where there was like a full plot in his backstory that was tying into the main story. So unsurprisingly, this episode ended up being a little bit longer than the last few have been. Although the runtimes are all a bit deceiving because there's like a solid 5+ minutes of end credits on this. So when I saw 62 minutes or whatever it is, you have to remember there's like 5 minutes to cut off. Not that it's a big difference or a big deal, but anyway. Yeah, no, I liked some of again, this was a world building episode. It was definitely teasing some big stuff. My ears perked up quite quickly in the first sort of one-on-one scene between the ghoul and his wife, or Cooper, I should say, where they're in the hot tub and they're talking about, he's maybe thinking about retiring and doing something else and getting away from all this hustle and bustle. And she kind of shoots that down and laughs at it on a number of things. But effectively, the where my ears really perked up in this scene, outside of maybe this being the start of like why their marriage might fall apart, is when he says, we don't need to be a part of Vault-Tec to get into a vault. We've got the money, we can just buy our way into a vault. And she responds with, yeah, but we can get into a good vault, or one of the good vaults. And he's like, what do you mean by that? And she never answers. She kind of skirts the question, but that like made my ears perk right up because we've been talking a lot this season about Vault 31 compared to 32 and 33. And of course, we also have Vault 4 in this episode. That's the one that the other characters are in right now, Lucy and Maximus. Immediately really raised this idea of there being a hierarchy of the vaults and that some are actually much more important than others. In the opening scene, which is the first flashback, it's this big extended advert of the vault, and it's Vault 4 that's been used in this ad campaign. And we get Walton Goggins doing his best Rod Serling almost, because it's in 4x3, black and white, he's wearing a suit and tie. And it was fun to watch, it was a fun little sequence. But the big important part of the scene, really, other than the cheesy little bit where he winked and said, the vault will keep out the rads and the reds, and then winked because, communism. But it's when he meets this like Rod guy afterwards, or Bud, whatever his name was. In fact, that was even one of the jokes, is that he couldn't remember his name either. But he talks about like his role. He brags about the power armor, which then Walton Goggins points out that he was in the battles in Alaska, and a lot of his friends died because that armor was shit. So it gets a little bit awkward. But this guy clearly doesn't care about people. That's kind of like the sentiment that part of the conversation gets across, is that he doesn't care about the human life. He only cares about, well, probably money, but managing like the resources in the life. And talks quite a bit here about how the future is all about management. He says that's what it all boils down to. It's the greatest resource is time, and the way that will control the future is management. And I think that links up with that idea later on, which is that Vault-Tec, the schemy bastards, like whatever the layout of these vaults is, and whatever the hierarchy and what purpose each vault has, because we hear that later in the episode, that every vault has its own different purpose that's different from the other ones. And Vault 4's got some weird things going on, which we'll talk about. But it really calls to question what the overall idea, and I don't know if any of this is from the games or if this is all completely new stuff, but the idea of what Vault-Tec was trying to do with the vaults is some kind of play to like control the entire human race eventually, when everything dies down. Or I mean, are things going to plan as far as like their map was concerned right now? Or is this like went way off track? It's actually hard to say right now. We don't really know, but certainly some of the vaults have fallen to the outside, right? Vault 32 certainly has. So very curious to explore that stuff more. But there's a lot of themes that come up in this flashback story. We see Matt Berry, voice of the robot. We see the actor in the show that Matt Berry plays, who voices the robot, who was paid to voice the robot, and is finds out that he get really underpaid for it because Walton Goggins guesses that he got $10 million, and he's like, I got less than 200 grand. But this scene's very much about how, yeah, a lot of the other actors aren't showing up to this party because they don't like Vault-Tec. They see Vault-Tec as this evil corporation that are trying to control the future. And it actually dawned on me as they were having this conversation why it's a little bit ironic that Amazon made this show. Because Amazon's kind of one of those super companies that it feels like it's trying to spread and grow into different things, and might potentially, like, if we ever get to that dystopian world where there's only like 3 companies that control everything, one of them might be Amazon. Like, that's kind of where we are in the world. He talks about how, you know, we're not like them. Communism's spreading throughout Hollywood, but we care about products, and that's what we're about, and we're doing the right thing here. But that sets up these ideas and these themes that's the influence that he's got around him right now. Between his wife pushing him to do these ads, this one Hollywood friend making this kind of statement, but he also mentions this other friend of Coop's, this a Native American actor who we see a little bit later, who's going to these meetings that he's calling commie meetings. Now, of course, I didn't think for a second that was necessarily accurate, because typically speaking, this tone, this vibe about them talking about commies is very much based on a certain time period in America where that accusation was thrown around a lot and was often incorrect. You know, I'm not saying it definitely is incorrect. This character doesn't correct Walton Goggins when he meets him at the bar, but I think this was a very interesting scene as well, because it showed that Coop wasn't very good at being aware of some of the problems in the world. And maybe that's why he's been kind of blindsided with the reaction to him doing these ads. This idea that he's lost some movie roles now because he's associated with Vault-Tec and he's associated with these ads. And he was keeping his nose out of the politics of it all. And maybe that in some ways is what Coop kind of represents. He was someone, if I'm trying to draw an allegory to the real world, he's someone who just didn't pay attention and didn't have big opinions on like the actual politics of things, and then suddenly realized that he'd been kind of put on one side by happenstance and hadn't really chosen that side for himself. But I think they show that he's kind of ignorant to things, because the Native American actor brings up once Walton Goggins mentions, oh hey, we've done movies together. And the actor points out, yeah, but I always play the villain. I always play the Indian who's getting shot by you. Like, that's my purpose in Hollywood. And Walton Goggins just kind of like, he just kind of hand waves it and says, yeah, but you get paid a lot. You've got a big ranch. Like, you're doing all right. And even when they start talking about a specific movie, he then again points out that his role was kind of demeaning. And once again, Goggins is like, no, like, your character was important. It was a great role for you. You spoke to horses or something. I think that was the line. And it was really just showing this idea that he's really not that attentive to, like, what other people are going through, what different groups are going through. And he sees this guy as a friend. He's speaking to him as such, but he's also completely oblivious to any sort of discrimination that this guy might be feeling about things, even when he's flat out saying that he doesn't like that he's always in these exact same roles. So I thought that was a really interesting little character bit to sort of show you who Cooper was. And, I think there's a few smart little details in this as well. Anyway, so he invites him to like a meeting to say, hey, like, at least come and hear about it yourself, see what your wife's actually involved in, if you end up believing any of it, come and check it out. So he takes the card, and then the next scene that he has with his wife, the wife just kind of like has a look on her face, and she's kind of sad because she's worried that her daughter's going to struggle with not having the dog. And Cooper's like, why wouldn't she have the dog? And she's like, oh, it's we're not allowed dogs in the vaults. And he's like, wait a minute, why? Who decided that? And she just kind of gets really stern and says it's the policy. And actually, on that word, it did not escape my attention that the very next scene was the scene with Lucy talking to the one-eyed overseer, where he brings up that one of the things they're doing is just a policy from before his time. And it really sort of linked up that idea that the policies that Vault-Tec have set up for these vaults, these people generations later are still following them to the letter without really understanding what the purpose of the policy was in the first place. It kind of points to kind of the concern that Cooper brings up here is like, well, who's making these decisions and why are they making these decisions? Do we have any freedom? He even brings up, can I change the color of the vault suit if I want to? And given everything we've seen in the vaults, they're all wearing blue and yellow. Like, no one's wearing anything else. It really feels like this company has found themselves into a way of like just being in complete control. Because that was the other thing in the conversation actually in the bar with I should get his name here. Charles Whiteknife was the name of the Native American character. He talks about how because they've created all these products and the vaults, and they're working with the Robotech company, whatever it's called, to make the Pip-Boys and everything else. They're basically they owe it to their investors for there to be a market for these things. So, and it's almost implying, and then again, I don't know if Fallout lore in the games has covered this in the past, but it's almost implying that the Vault-Tec themselves maybe eventually actually pushed. If not, I'm not saying they literally launched the nukes themselves, but they intentionally tried to orchestrate the nuclear war to happen with their influence, by telling the governments to pull out. And in fact, he even mentions in the scene that the US government is dirt poor because of the decade of war that Walton Goggins' character had been in previously that you mentioned earlier. So that's like a big deal. There's a lot of like history kind of been peppered in there. It was all quite fascinating on its own little way of like the idea of like how civilization got to this point and how a corporation effectively became more important than the government and had more power than the government. And that's what they compare it to the movie, the cowboy movie, where the cattle ranchers had more power than the sheriff, and it led to the town burning down. And as we know from the show, the world burns down after this mega corporation's in power, whether or not they directly wanted it to happen or not. But this conversation certainly implies that this is what they're worried about, is that it's in their interest to at least keep the fear of nuclear war heavy and ever present. And maybe they wanted the war, or maybe they just pushed it a little bit too far and the war happened anyway. Either way, these were all interesting little tidbits to get. But yeah, he has the fight here about the dog with the wife, and she gets emotional and talks about how she's doing all this so that the people she cares about will definitely be safe. But she does drop another little interesting tidbit about how they're going to go into a special vault that oversees all the other vaults for management. Again, there's that word again. Management pops up again, tying back to that earlier scene. And he drops it, he gets apologetic and says that he understands that she's always doing what she thinks is best, and it's all that. But I really do feel that while this scene, he deflates it at the end of the scene, I think this is the scene that directly motivates him to go to the meeting. He wants to go check it out now, I think, because of the way that she is pushing this so hard. He wants to make sure that she's not effectively being pulled into some kind of corporate cult or something like that. He wants to know who this company is and what they're doing and see if there's any truth to this. So, I mean, that's pretty much it. Obviously, he goes to the meeting. We don't get to see the meeting, but we get a big reveal that plays out alongside the Lucy plot here, where the leader of this meeting turns out to be Moldaver, who's the woman who apparently has Lucy's father and seemingly has been alive since before the bombs dropped. We don't think she's a ghoul. Now, there is a thing introduced at the end of this episode that could explain why she's around, because there's cryosleep pods effectively at the end of this episode, which I imagine a lot of the rich assholes, the head of Vault-Tec, probably wanted to be cryo-frozen, I guess I'm trying to say. I was going to say cryo-slept, but that wasn't quite right. They probably wanted to be frozen and wake us up when the Earth is nice again or something. I don't know. Now, how Moldaver, who I think is going by a different name based on the fact that the ghoul in the present day stuff reacts to her photo or her wanted poster and says, "Wait, this is Moldaver." He clearly didn't expect that to. He knows he's hearing a lot about Moldaver. He says that to the other guy in the scene, but when he sees the wanted poster and the guy says that's Moldaver, he's like, "Wait, what?" So he clearly doesn't know her by that name, or at the very least, he's forgotten her name. But that's unlikely. That's unlikely. But yeah, so that's interesting. She's also the head of the New California Republic, seemingly, based on the cult stuff that was happening with her image and the Lucy plot. But just to stay with the Ghoul for a second here, interesting tidbit, because there's not too much to his present day plot. It's mostly just he gets taken from that supermarket where he got all the vials of the stuff. He was on the floor. These cops effectively arrest them and take them to their leader. I think he calls himself president, but he's, whatever. It's kind of a self-appointed title. The Ghoul ends up killing everyone but the main guy, because they're going to kill him, but whatever. The key thing that caught my eye here, or my ear here, I should say, is that the guy says, why are you still around after all these years? And he says, and the final thing he says is that, or is it because you're still looking for her? Now, I don't think he's talking about Moldaver here, with that line. I think, because I watched this episode yesterday and I was too tired to record, so I'll just do it tomorrow. So I rewatched some scenes and sort of skimmed through just to refresh my memory before I came out to talk about it. And what really stuck, in my memory, I kind of started to sort of fudge some things together before I sort of looked at it again. And I was starting to think, oh, maybe it just means Moldaver here. Like, that's who he's looking for. But I'd forgotten in the same scene that he actually, brings up Moldaver separately. The Ghoul brings her up separately. So that's clearly not who he's actively looking for. In the context of what this guy's suggesting, obviously, it's either his wife or his daughter. I would be inclined to say it's more likely to be his wife, given that his daughter was with him when the bombs dropped, and the wife presumably was in a vault or get into a vault because of who she was with the company. Now, admittedly, more flashbacks could change that, and we could find out the daughter ended up in a vault or got cryo frozen or whatever. But it seems like it's probably one or the other, and I'm curious to see where that goes. But that was like the main thing that came out of the present day stuff with the Ghoul. For the Ghoul, this episode, it was all the flashbacks. It was all the coup actor stuff and the build up to the fall of civilization, basically. Meanwhile, in the vault, number 4, to be precise, we get Lucy and Maximus. Maximus at first is very distrusting of the place and thinks they're trying to trap them. And I thought that because the room they were in literally said test subjects above it. I was doing a lot of theorizing last episode, thinking they were going to want to eat them. That doesn't seem to be the case, although they certainly are up to something weird. And it also feels like they don't want them to leave as well. Because when Maximus is like, hey, we want to go, they basically give them a few reasons why they can't go yet. But yeah, so it feels like maybe they are trapped there technically, although I suspect they will get out in short time. But we meet the Overseer, who's got one eye, and specifically one eye in the middle, right? That's even an exchange that Lucy and Maximus have. But what's interesting is that over the course of the episode, Lucy goes from saying, oh, this is the best place, this is a vault, you can trust it here, Maximus, to immediately starting to get suspicious and wanting to be inquisitive and inspect things and wanting to leave. Whereas Maximus goes from not wanting to be here, trying to steal a power fuel cell for his suit, which the vault happened to fight. I guess this vault sends out search parties because they said they found the suit and brought it back, which is again very different to the other vaults that we've seen. But I suppose it makes sense, given what we learn about it, is that half the people in this vault are from the surface. They're people who were refugees from that city that got nuked. Not at the start of the nukings, but the one that Maximus was sort of around for as a boy. And seemingly this is the policy of this vault. That's what the Overseer says. He doesn't like that they bring down what did he call them? Surfies is what he called them. But he's not allowed to call them that. He goes on a whole rant about how he doesn't like Surfies and how he has to respect their feelings if he wants to get elected Overseer. And it's basically like a racist rant from like a politician who has to play nice with his like all of his demographics, even though he doesn't want to. Which was amusing because of this, how much of a silly version of that it was. But it also did kind of, again, tie into the flashbacks a little bit in the, you know, the some of the conversations that the Goggins character was having, and him being kind of ambivalent to, or not, that's not the right word, but being ignorant to what some other people were going through. This felt like this was another, like, you know, policy was a word that was popping up between both. But anyway, like, what we learn here is interesting, and arguably I should say we get teased here, because I don't know if I'd say I've learned anything concrete. There's definitely a lot of weird things to process that we should get more of in the future. What do we have? We have all the surface dwellers that are in this vault that have been reformed, seemingly, worship Moldaver like a cult and get, like, naked and do, like, a ceremony about her as they cover themselves in the ashes of the people who died in the nuclear bomb that went off in their city. So that's something. There's a mysterious 12th level they're not allowed to go to, but of course after seeing this, Lucy's like, screw this, I'm going to level 12. She tries to go to Maximus first and get his help to try and leave or whatever, but at this point he's been given his own room and food and a hot shower, which I must admit, I did laugh quite a bit when the woman said you can have a hot shower, and he's like, when you say a hot shower, what do you mean by that? His delivery of what do you mean by that really made me laugh. It was just this idea of, like, no, he's literally never even considered. It's not just that he's never had a hot shower, he's never even, like, thought it was a possibility. It's never even been a concept that he's dealt with. Much like seemingly sex. That was something that comes up. When they're in quarantine at the start of the episode, he mentions that Lucy smells nice, and she's like, oh, I think he's attracted to me. So she's like, hey, do you want to have sex? Shrug. He's like, use my cock? Oh, I don't know, that's risky. I've heard of this thing that can happen where it gets bigger and then it pops like a pimple, and oh, no, that's dangerous. And she has to explain to him that that's normal and it's desired even. And he just kind of like he's like, oh, I'm a knight, I shouldn't. He sort of pretends like it would be against his honor. It is funny though how different the attitudes towards sex have been from some of these different characters, and how for Lucy it seemed a lot more casual, but like clearly neither one, I would say, has the attitude towards sex that, like, that's, I don't know if there's a normal attitude toward, you know what I mean, like they're both definitely different in terms of, like, compared to, like, a modern day person in terms of how they think about it. He especially is very, very uneducated in the process, which also made me laugh later on when she comes to see him and he's like, would you like to make my cock explode now? And she's like, no, now's not the time. Things are dangerous here. Things may be going on. We have to deal with this. Anyway, yeah, there's a guy with, like, a nose on his forehead. There's, like, people with, was it blue eyes? Not like regular blue eyes. Like the entire eye was blue. It was a thing. Anyway, she goes to level 12 and she sees it's like a tank with, like, a chair in it, effectively. And there's, like, an old VHS tape, or their equivalent of VHS. And she puts it in, and it shows a woman in this tank who's pregnant, giving birth. But she's giving birth to what are effectively piranha, who then eat her alive. That's what was on the tape. And given, you know, the various vault dwellers in here that are not surface people, that have, you know, mutations, we'll call them, I did get the impression, oh, this is like some sort of weird experiment vault. I mean, given the fact that they've got a room labeled test subjects also implies that. So, you know, I was sort of, especially after that conversation and the flashbacks about each vault having a purpose and whatnot, I was like, oh, what is the purpose of this vault? Very interesting. But she also finds all these cryo sleep pods, and there's people in there. Lucy put up a hell of a fight, actually, when she got caught and she was trying to, like, fight back against everyone. She held it her own well enough. The episode then just ends with Maximus happy in his bathrobe, eating food that is more luxurious than anything he's ever had, watching the TV that is doing nothing but playing a waterfall, and he is a happy lad. He's probably never seen a TV screen before, so he's just delighted. Yeah, this was again another really interesting episode. I think one of the probably one of the assets of this show is that I don't think any two episodes have felt too the same. And there's positives and negatives to that. I think one of the negatives to that is that as I'm watching an episode, it feels like, oh, I can't just expect to enjoy it like I did like a previous one that I really liked. But the positive to that is that it keeps surprising me with the things that it's introducing and the way it's choosing to focus on certain plots at certain times. There was no Vault 33 plot in this, right? Like, there was none of that. So this was just Vault 4 and then the ghoul stuff, mainly the flashbacks, but, both. So I think the focus is really good. I think these ideas that get introduced about the Vault systems, which is something they're really playing with. Obviously, we're only 2 episodes now left, and I feel like, okay, this Moldaver like build up there's been a reasonable amount, but at the same time, it feels like we're definitely going to see her, I assume, in at least the finale. But like, I've got a funny feeling there's going to be a lot left here for season 2 to possibly dig into. Luckily, it's already been renewed, so I don't have to worry about it. But it's curious. But yeah, it's no, it's interesting. The idea that Vault-Tec is this super evil corporation, like a dystopian level corporation, but instead of getting into a cyberpunk dystopia, we just go into a nuclear, a post-apocalyptic world instead is something to really think about. So I think this was playing with its themes. It was giving, I think, Coop some interesting plot in the flashbacks, because it was kind of like, not only was it setting up the ideas that maybe lead him and his wife to parting ways in some way, but just this idea of like him finally sort of learning about some of the beliefs and politics that are at play between Vault-Tec and, well, everyone else that's against Vault-Tec, I think is interesting. And it's funny, Lucy in many ways is the audience surrogate in the main timeline of the show, because she's never been out on the surface, right? So she comes out onto the wasteland and she's learning about everything for the first time. So we get to experience that and through her questioning. So she gets to get a lot of answers that help us because we want those answers as an audience. I think in the flashbacks with Cooper, even though he shouldn't be a fish out of water, he kind of is, in that he's realizing that there's stuff going on here that he should be aware of, and he's learning things, so we're learning that with him. And arguably, even in this episode, the same's true for Maximus learning about the Vault. To an extent. I mean, at this point, we've already learned a lot about the Vault, so I don't know if we learn anything new through Maximus in this episode. But we do get to see him be a fish out of water down here. So we've kind of got, like, all 3 characters have all got their own kind of domains in a weird way. Where the ghoul is a wastelander, right? But in the flashbacks, obviously he's very different. But in the present day part, he's a wastelander. We've got our Brotherhood of Steel, who's very sheltered from the rest of the world. And then we've got a Vault Dweller, who's extremely sheltered from the rest of the world. So they've all got like different places to go into where they'll be less comfortable. And it's interesting with this one because it flips it around and makes it more comfortable for Maximus. He's seduced by the comfort of it, which again fits into the themes of the flashbacks, where lots of people are just attracted to the comfort of the vaults, and they're being promised all these big things of they're safe and this is where we should go, this is where you'll be successful, this is where you'll thrive. Rich people are flocking to them because it's where you'll make home if the bombs ever drop. The idea that Maximus is being seduced by this, just like people pre-nuclear fallout were being seduced by it, makes a lot of sense, especially since he's relatively naive. He's also someone who has made some very rash decisions since the start of this show and is immature in many ways. So it makes sense that he's attracted to, oh, there's some caviar and some cereal, and I don't usually have those things. The performance from the actor, though, from Aaron Moten, was very good in this episode. Like all the little mannerisms and the way he phrased things and enunciated things as he was like curious about the different foods or the hot water, the sex, whatever it was. All of it was very endearing and kind of entertaining to watch. So, very good. So yeah, that's episode 6. I am looking forward to watching episode 7. We're very near the end. I'm hoping that I'll have episode 7 out sometime over the weekend. I can't promise it for sure, I'm pretty busy at the weekend, but I'm going to try to. But either way, we'll definitely be finishing next week. So thank you very much for joining me. I do appreciate it. Keep watching TV. And of course, support everything over on patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. Helps out a bunch if you do. But thank you very much. I'll see you next time. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?